So Shaykh Hamza Yusuf has been described in the press as the West's most influential Islamic scholar. A convert to Islam, he is the founder of the Zaytuna Institute in California, which seeks to educate people about the Muslim faith. He has also been described by one newspaper as President Bush's pet Muslim. You're very welcome on our programme this morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Are you President Bush's link to the Muslim world? Have you been that?
No, not at all. I think after September 11th, I was the Muslim that was invited in to discuss the situation with him. So I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about that came out of that. But in fact, I think it's quite the opposite.
You were responsible, though, for changing the name of Operation Infinite Justice. Right.
I did bring that up in that meeting, that Infinite Justice was, and I think Christians and Jews and any other monotheistic traditions would certainly consider Infinite Justice a blasphemous concept, the idea that somehow that America has infinite capacity for being just.
Yes, that kind of control freakery doesn't tend to go well in the secular or religious context.
Yeah, I think the response to that was the president said that we don't have theologians in the Pentagon, and I think that would probably be kind of an interesting idea to maybe bring some theologians in to discuss things, because it seems like the moral case is very weak.
You've said some very interesting things about where Islam is at the moment, and the fact that you believe it's experiencing quite a dark age. Why?
Well, I would say that the Muslims, in a sense, are going through a particularly difficult time. I think that the Muslims were a very successful civilization and people for centuries, and in a way it's difficult for us in the West to kind of imagine how the scenario was, because for many, many centuries it was in fact the Muslims that were the enlightened people and the people of education, erudition, and right now in this post-colonial period that's been going on for some time. I mean, the decline of Islam was going on for a very long time, but the post-colonial period is particularly painful because not only were the institutions dismantled during the colonial period, educational institutions, so scholars, for instance, in the Muslim world, we really are suffering from a dearth of scholars in the Muslim world. And because of that, a lot of people that are not trained or educated theologically or in Islamic jurisprudence have suddenly become these spokesmen for the Islamic tradition, and very often they're extreme in their views, and these views are put forward somehow as being mainstream Islam, which it's like taking something like David Koresh from Waco, Texas, and saying that he represents mainstream Christianity.
Was that what had happened with the Taliban? Because I know that there were some scholars who believed that they were actually not forward-looking, and they had used an interpretation that was really quite backward.
Well, I think that the Taliban, personally, I really feel that the Taliban, it was an attempt at just stabilizing an incredibly destabilized condition, and I think that, for instance, this we often saw on the news media this one. It was the same picture over and over again of some Taliban hitting a woman, and we don't really know if it was a Taliban, but that's what the image showed. And I think that you can take a picture like Rodney King being beaten by the LA police, and suddenly all American policemen are going around beating people up. So I think one of the things that the media does.
Yes, although the LAPD did admit they had a problem.
Well, they do have a problem, but my point is that what the media tends to do is put a magnifying glass on things, and suddenly it would appear that that's the only thing going on. I think what was ironic was when the National Geographic found the famous picture of that Pathan woman who had been on the cover as a little girl. She actually said that she'd fared quite well under them. I think what people don't realize is that the entire country was in a state of anarchy. Indeed, they did shut down the schools. They told women to stay at homes, but part of the reason why they took over in the first place was because of the rape of Pathan women by the northern Afghanis. So I just, I think, it was an unfortunate situation. But I also feel that there's been an incredible amount of disinformation personally, and I did speak to a lot of people that were there during that time. I think that the biggest mistake that group made was allying with very radical elements that were in the country that were foreign, because the Afghani people, and I've lived spent quite a bit of time, many of my students have been Afghanis. The Afghani people are actually a very they're a wonderful people, and I think many of the Western people that have gone to Afghanistan, and there's a famous French photographer, Roland, who spent a great deal of time there, has recently put out a book just saying that the Afghanistan he reads in the newspapers, it's not the Afghanistan he knew in the 1960s, which was a land of just incredible beauty, both in its human population as well as its physical geography.
Would you say, though, that you could make quite a fair comparison to politics in this country, whereby people say the rise of the right has been allowed because there is a slightly kind of moribund or stagnated platform in British politics? Is it the same in the Islamic world, that fundamentalism has been allowed to thrive?
No, I don't think there's any comparison at all, because I think what happens in the West, one of the things that happens when you do have a considerable amount of liberty and freedom to do what you want, a lot of people here just don't think about politics a great deal in the West, particularly in America. I mean, America, although it does have a lot of political activism, the political activism tends to be more like football teams, like I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat, and it's more Raiders and Buccaneers type approach to things. But in terms of serious political understanding, I think that the Muslim world has been living under despotism for so long that fundamentalism becomes a pathological reaction to the deep repressive elements that have been controlling the Muslim world. And so religion becomes a liberation theology. It becomes a voice for the voiceless. And I think really that's at the root of a lot of the problems. For instance, if you look at in the Palestinian situation, in the 1960s and 70s, it was Marxism which was the dominant method of rebellion, or not rebellion, but just as their political voice. And in the 80s and 90s, it begins to move into an Islamic discourse, but they bring in a lot of Marxist elements into the discourse. And so I think what's happened in the Muslim world is you've had a great deal of influence from Marxism, and so the Islamic political movements have often been tainted by a type of Marxist revolutionary rhetoric, because Islam is not, in fact, a revolutionary tradition. It attempts to purify existing societies rather than to completely turn them upside down.
But purify through converting?
Purify through converting, and through also through principles. I mean, I think the Islamic tradition is a tradition that it's not a theocratic tradition in the sense that God is not speaking directly to us. The Muslims also believe in the idea of natural law, and they believe in revelation as principles that have been given through a messenger. And then the human mind attempts to apply those principles in the world. But human beings are always going to fall short of that. And I think one of the things that what extremists do is they arrogate to themselves the voice of God, and that is why they're able to kill people innocently, because they really believe that they're acting with absolute authority. And this is, I mean, every religious tradition recognizes the total fallacy in that perspective.
Let's hear from Colin, who's in Kings Lynn, Mohammed, who's in Birmingham, and Farida, who's in Kingsbury. Hello, Colin. Very good morning to you. You're through to Shaykh Hamza Yusuf.
Good morning, Sheikh. Good morning, Fee. My question is really directed as a person of colour in the United Kingdom. I'm so afraid of what people in the Islamic community are doing that there's no one actually in the UK from the moderate Islamic community who are speaking out against what I believe now is a cancer in your religion. Either someone has hijacked your religion to the point where it is now...
But why do you believe that, Colin? I mean, based on what? What's the manifestation of that cancer?
Well, you only have to look around you, around every corner of the globe at the moment. In the 1980s, you had the problem with communism and so on and so forth. Right now, the biggest problem that this world faces, where I have a 9-year-old, is my fear now is Islam and where it is going. And all I want is for people like yourself, who are reasonable, to actually address your community and actually find out why is it that your religion is inherently intolerant.
Right, okay.
Well, first of all, I would say that I think what you need to do, I mean, in religious studies we have an idea of what's called descriptive and normative practice. Descriptive is what people do, normative is what the actual religion teaches. And I think what you have to look at, when historians look back at this century, the 20th century, and now we're moving into the 21st, I think that what's going to be really obvious is that the most violent people on the planet have clearly been Western Europeans and Americans, much more violent. I mean, the number of deaths that we have caused with our weapons of mass destruction reduces the rest of the world to really very small numbers. In the Muslim world, probably less than 2% of the violence in the last 100 years has actually had anything to do with the Muslim world. So I think it's very distorted because we don't really look in these historical perspectives. I mean, I feel that one of the things about the Muslim world is it has been suffering a great deal, and I think that what we're seeing, as opposed to a cancer, I would say that it's feverish. It's a immune system response that is out of balance, but because there is a great deal of suffering going on. I mean, if we look right now just at the globe, people are very unaware of what's happening in Chechnya, Kashmir, in Palestine, in Algeria, in places where there's just an immense amount of suffering, and certainly in Iraq. And I think a lot of Muslims feel that, and they're incredibly frustrated because they are a voiceless community that they really believe is not being listened to. And unfortunately, I mean, I personally really feel that one of the things that these extremist elements is that they are a scream or a shout for an entire civilization and community to be heard, and this is 1/5 of the world's population. And if we don't start listening, I really feel that it is going to get worse, and that will be just tragic.
Colin, you surely don't equate all Muslims with the kind of actions that we saw by people claiming to be part of that faith on September the 11th. And they weren't obeying the rules of the
certainly
Quran.
not
they
working
were
within the
living against the Quran.
I don't equate all Muslims. This is the point. I'm saying there is a problem. Too often they use this excuse or that excuse to excuse certain things. Look, as a Christian, the central tenet of my faith tells me to forgive my enemy. It doesn't tell me to go and murder my enemy.
But there are many people who have claimed Christianity to be their religion who have attacked and who have shown aggression, Colin. I mean, are you really fearful of the Muslim faith at the moment?
The point that the Sheikh made is valid, that over the generations, Christians have been far more responsible for far more deaths. I can accept that. But the point is, my daughter doesn't live in the 18th century or the 17th century.
I'm talking really more about the 20th century.
She lives, or the 20th, she lives now. And I want her to be able to get on a flight when she's 18 and not worry about people who say that Allah tells them that they should crash a plane into a building.
But you can't hold that against every Muslim, Colin.
Yeah, but why don't we have more people actually come out and say this concept of suicide bombing or jihad is completely alien to this religion?
Colin, thank you very much for that call. It was something that Margaret Thatcher said after September the 11th, that she wanted to see more leadership from the Muslim community in this country, and condemning it. And
we do have serious complications here. I mean, I think that overall, for instance, Palestine is incredibly complicated, and it does muddy the waters for clear thinking about things, because I think the vast majority of Muslims do view that the Palestinians have inherent rights there, and what they do, even if it's these extreme acts. I mean, I personally am completely against the use of violence against civilians, against women and children, and also what would be termed as something that is beyond government authority. If you're acting as a vigilante, not without, I mean, it's just anarchy, and Islam prohibits any type of vigilantism.
We'll take more calls, 0500 909 693 after the travel, but also we have a statement which has just been received here. It says that the government has been forced to make a common statement on airport security. The Common Speaker has agreed to the request made by the Conservatives. At this stage, it hasn't been confirmed whether the Home Secretary David Blunkett will make the statement. There'll also be a statement on Iraq from the Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and the weekly business statement from the Commons leader Robin Cook. So probably the first will start at 12:30 and Jack Straw on probably at 1:15. You'll hear all of those things here on 5 Live. Hello, Anna.
Hello, thanks for Perth and Ross. First of all, at the A9, M90, A93 Broxton roundabout, temporary roadworks are going on until 3:30 this afternoon. They reduced the roundabout to one lane only, so allow for delays on all approaches. In Stirling, the A875 stays closed for accident recovery between Balfron and the A811 junction at Cammock Hill. No change in Cheshire either. They're still clearing the lorry load from the A54 northbound at Bosley, north of Congleton. So in the meantime, that side of the road stays closed. In Derbyshire, though, the A38 has reopened northbound after an earlier car fire at the A52 junction at Markeaton. The A511 in Staffordshire, that's still closed after this morning's accident on Ashby Road in Burton-upon-Trent. And on public transport, there are still delays on London's tube network following this morning's major signal failure. Anna Rajan, 5 Live Travel.
Not all the weekend stories are sport-related.
We'll be bringing you the full story and the background to today's shuttle disaster.
Well, we were awakened by a tremendous sound, and there was a bunch of debris that fell that was burning.
The last few minutes, NASA has announced that it started an inquiry.
It started in the left wing, but the rest of the space shuttle would stand no chance.
If you have any questions, please text us on 85058.
I think it's important to emphasise that the shuttle wasn't carrying any radioactive payload.
The Weekend News
With Richard Evans
and Asma Mir.
Saturday and Sunday nights from 8, 5 Live.
Shaykh Hamza Yusuf is my guest this morning. So many calls, so if you can try and keep your questions brief, we would appreciate it. Mohammed in Birmingham, very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Fee. Good morning, Shaykh Hamza.
Good morning.
Alaikum assalam. I just want to ask a question, please. It's to do with the fact that you've been on record saying that Muslims should revive their intellectual tradition, especially the classical heritage of jurisprudence.
Right.
And many people have actually started doing that because of your advice. But what they find is that once they start studying the books and the scholars that are recommended traditionally to try to get a traditional understanding, the teaching that they find is a teaching which is currently condemned as being extremist and fundamentalist. I myself try to study Hanafi fiqh, and especially about jihad. And the very first line I ever read of a classical text of Islamic jurisprudence on jihad is that jihad is obligatory on the Muslims, regardless of whether non-Muslims attack us or do not attack us. And this is currently being taught in Islamic seminaries throughout the Muslim world by traditional scholars. And I find, for instance, that what you are saying currently, especially just what you have said recently, doesn't seem to gel with what you were saying previously. And I honestly find that there's some sort of disingenuity here, because if we are to discover our heritage has aspects which are not compatible with Western civilization.
Well,
jihad.
I just
want to bring one point up. You brought up the
I'll tell you what, Mohammed,
the Taliban.
Let's just hear the answer to that. Cause
yeah, well,
important.
First of all, I would say that, jihad is an obligation binding upon Muslims, which is defense of the homelands. It's also the removal of aggression. But the normative practice of the Muslims has always been that aggression is prohibited. The Quran is very clear on that. La ta'tadu, don't be aggressive in your wars. The Quran says if they incline towards peace, then you too should incline towards peace. The Quran permits, and certainly in traditional jurisprudence, the treaties with non-Muslim nations, and those treaties are to be honored. You will find differing views, there is no doubt, because like I said earlier, Islam is not theocratic in we know exactly what God meant, but it's human attempts at understanding what God means. And that is why, first of all, most of those laws that deal with international relations, that deal with these, have nothing to do with your average Muslims. And when your average Muslims begin to take it upon themselves to implement laws that have to do with state polity and state power, this is where the confusion comes in. It's none of the average Muslim's business to be attempting to apply laws that are directed to the rulers of a country. And this is what's known in the Islamic tradition as fard ayn and fard kifaya. An ayn, everybody has to do it, like praying 5 times a day, paying zakat, these things. Kifaya, only those people that need to do it. The other people don't do it. And certainly in rules relating to government, that has nothing to do with the common people.
But I can see where the confusion would lie, though. I mean, if you're advocating that people do read these texts,
no, but if they read them
without
without qualified teachers, absolutely, you're going to have serious problems. You can't just pick up a book and read. Look, in England, no one will allow a barrister who has not been trained in law school to go out and practice law. And constitutional law is certainly, you have to know interpretive practices, hermeneutics. You have to learn how to derive principles. I mean, if we had people reading a book on surgery and going out and performing surgery on people out in the society, it's madness. And so, this idea that I can pick up my book and become a weekend mufti is absolute insanity.
The GMC is very busy dealing with some of those cases to do with medicine at the moment. Mohammed,
can I just come back to one point, please?
Of course you can, and then I want to ask you a question myself.
Okay, the point being, I'm not. What I'm trying to say, for instance, you mentioned the Taliban themselves. The thing about the Taliban is that they were a government. They were Taliban, which means students. They didn't